They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But when I watched my husband board our $12 million corporate jet with his mistress, thinking they were heading to the Maldives for a romantic getaway, I served mine at 35,000 feet. And let me tell you, the temperature up there gets very, very cold. Cold enough to freeze a man's lies mid-sentence. Cold enough to shatter 15 years of marriage like ice hitting concrete. My name is Victoria Ashford. Or at least, it was Victoria Ashford until 3 months ago. Now I'm Victoria Chen again, reclaiming the name I carried before I became Mrs. Richard Ashford. Before I helped build a billion-dollar empire from nothing but code and ambition. Before I discovered that the man sleeping beside me every night, the man I trusted with my heart, my business, and my future, was nothing more than a liar wrapped in custom-tailored suits and rehearsed affection. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought mattered and discovered what actually does. How I went from being the blindly devoted wife to the woman who brought a cheating husband to his knees without ever raising her voice or losing her composure. How one carefully planned flight route change exposed 15 years of lies and saved me from a lifetime of living in someone else's shadow. How I learned that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who built the room in the first place. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Let me take you back. Back to that Tuesday morning in late September when the entire foundation of my carefully constructed life cracked open like an egg, spilling out all the rot that had been growing inside. Back to the moment when I stopped being a wife and became a warrior. It was one of those perfect autumn mornings that make you believe everything in the world is exactly as it should be. The kind of morning where the air has that crisp, clean quality that feels like possibility. The sky was that impossible shade of blue that only happens when summer finally releases its grip and fall begins to paint the world in different colors. I remember thinking, as I drove to work that morning, that I was lucky. Blessed, even. Successful career, beautiful home, loving husband. A company that was changing industries and making headlines. What a fool I was. What a blind, trusting fool. I arrived at Ashford Global Solutions headquarters at 7:15, like I did every morning. Our building was downtown, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that reflected the sky and made the whole structure look like it was part of the clouds. 43 floors of innovation and ambition, with our company occupying the top 12. We'd designed the space ourselves when we moved in 5 years ago, after our third major acquisition made it clear we'd outgrown our previous offices. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor took exactly 93 seconds. I'd timed it once, in those early days when we first moved in and I was still giddy with the achievement of it all. 93 seconds from the marble lobby to my corner office with its walls of windows and view of the entire city. 93 seconds to rise above the world and look down on everything we'd conquered. My office was my sanctuary. I'd spent weeks designing every detail, working with architects and designers to create a space that was both functional and beautiful. Minimalist furniture in clean lines and neutral colors. A custom-built standing desk where I could code for hours without my back giving out. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls that made me feel like I was floating in the sky. Built-in shelving that held awards and patents, and the first edition copy of The Art of Computer Programming that Richard had given me on our first anniversary, back when we were still eating ramen and dreaming big dreams. That morning, the sunrise was painting my office in shades of gold and rose. Beautiful, perfect, a lie wrapped in pretty light. I was deep into quarterly revenue reports when Maya knocked on my door at 9:30. Maya Rodriguez had been my executive assistant for 3 years, handpicked from a pool of over 200 candidates because she had something that couldn't be taught: instinct. She anticipated needs before they arose, solved problems before they became crises, and protected my time like a guard dog protecting its territory. She was 29, brilliant, fiercely loyal, and the only person in the building who called me Victoria instead of Mrs. Ashford. But that morning, when she walked through my door, something was different. Her usual confident stride was hesitant. Her warm smile was absent. She looked like someone carrying bad news they didn't want to deliver, and the expression on her face made my stomach tighten with the first whisper of unease. "Mrs. Ashford," she said quietly, and the formal address after 3 years of Victoria made my hands still on the keyboard. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should know about tomorrow's flight schedule." I glanced up from the spreadsheet I'd been analyzing, my mind still half-focused on revenue projections and market penetration rates. "Tomorrow's flight?" I asked, pulling my attention fully to her. "You mean Richard's trip to Singapore for the manufacturing plant negotiations?" Maya closed the door behind her with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been. She stood there for a moment, and I watched her gather herself, watched her square her shoulders like she was preparing for battle. "That's just it, Mrs. Ashford. Mr. Ashford filed a new flight plan this morning through the aviation department. The jet isn't going to Singapore anymore." My fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. The office suddenly felt very quiet, despite the muted sounds of the city 42 floors below. "He changed the destination. Did the Singapore deal fall through? Did someone send me an update I missed?" "No, ma'am." Maya's voice was soft but steady. "As far as I can tell, the Singapore deal is still on track, but the flight plan now shows the Maldives as the destination." The Maldives. The word hung in the air between us like smoke. The Maldives, where Richard and I had spent our 10th anniversary in an overwater villa that cost more per night than most people's monthly rent. Where we'd swum with sea turtles and made love under mosquito netting and talked about whether we wanted to try for children again after the miscarriages. Where Richard had told me I was the only woman he'd ever love, the only partner he'd ever need, the only person who truly understood him. "The Maldives," I repeated slowly, my voice strange in my own ears. "That's odd. Why would a business trip to Singapore suddenly become a vacation to the Maldives? Did he mention anything to you about changing plans?" Maya shifted her weight, and I saw her fingers tighten around the tablet she was holding. "Mrs. Ashford, there's something else. The passenger manifest lists 2 people for the flight." The world didn't stop. That's what people always say in moments like this, isn't it? That time freezes, that sound fades away, that everything goes into slow motion like a movie. But that's not what happened to me. Instead, everything got sharper, clearer. Like someone had just adjusted the focus on a camera that had been slightly blurry for so long I'd stopped noticing. I could hear everything. The soft hum of the air conditioning through the vents. The distant sound of a siren on the street below. The rustle of paper as Maya shifted the tablet in her hands. The rhythm of my own heartbeat, steady and strong despite the ice beginning to form in my chest. I could see everything in perfect detail. The way morning light was catching the edge of my coffee cup, the slight tremor in Maya's hand, the reflection of clouds moving across the glass walls of my office, the wedding photo on my desk, Richard and me 17 years younger, laughing like we'd just heard the world's best joke. "2 passengers," I said, and it wasn't a question. My voice was calm, analytical, the same voice I used when debugging code or solving impossible technical problems. Emotions could come later. Right now, I needed information. "I'm not listed as the 2nd passenger, am I?" "No, ma'am." Maya's dark eyes met mine, and I saw anger there, not at me, but for me. "The 2nd passenger is listed as Stephanie Corwin." And there it was, the name that would change everything, Stephanie Corwin. I sat very still in my chair, my hands resting on the keyboard, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not breaking, not yet, but changing, transforming from one thing into another, like code compiling into a new program. Stephanie Corwin, 28 years old, blonde hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, blue eyes that seemed to sparkle when she laughed. MBA from Stanford with honors. Head of our marketing department for the past 14 months. Ambitious, brilliant, and charming in that effortless way that some people have, like they were born knowing how to make others love them. I'd liked her when Richard first hired her. Admired her, even. She'd given a presentation to the executive team about rebranding our corporate image, and I'd been impressed by her strategic thinking, her understanding of market positioning, her confidence in presenting ideas to a room full of people twice her age with 10 times her experience. Richard had been impressed too. He'd talked about her constantly in those first few weeks. "Stephanie has such fresh perspectives. Stephanie suggested this brilliant approach to the Henderson account. Stephanie really understands where the industry is heading. I thought it was nice how much attention he paid to mentoring promising young talent, how invested he was in developing the next generation of leaders. God, I'd been so stupid, so utterly, completely blind. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what happens next is going to show you exactly what happens when a brilliant woman stops trusting her heart and starts trusting her brain. When the wife who built the empire decides it's time to remind everyone whose name is really on the foundation. Thank you, Maya, I said, and my voice sounded normal, completely normal, like she just told me about a scheduling conflict or a meeting change, not that my husband was planning to take another woman on a romantic vacation using our private jet. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Please don't mention this conversation to anyone, especially not to Richard or anyone in his immediate circle. Understanding flashed across Maya's face, followed by something that looked almost like grim satisfaction. Of course, Mrs. Ashford, I haven't said anything to anyone and I won't. And Victoria, she paused, using my first name deliberately. If you need anything at all, any information, any help with anything, I'm here. I mean that. After she left, closing the door with that same careful quiet, I sat in my chair and looked around my beautiful office. At the awards on the shelves, Innovation Leader of the Year, Top 40 Under 40 Technology Pioneer Award. At the patents framed on the wall, each one representing months or years of work, of late nights and impossible problems solved through sheer determination and brilliance. At the photos scattered across my desk and shelves, Richard and me at the TechCrunch Disrupt conference where we'd announced our Series C funding. Richard and me at the White House, invited to a dinner for technology leaders. Richard and me cutting the ribbon at our Singapore office opening. Richard and me, always together, always smiling, always presenting this image of the perfect partnership. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living in an illusion so complete, so carefully constructed, that I'd never seen the bars of my cage? I pulled up the flight manifest system on my computer, entering my administrative credentials. As Chief Technology Officer and co-founder, I had access to every system in the company. Every database, every record, every piece of data that flowed through our digital infrastructure. I designed most of these systems myself, built them from the ground up to be secure, efficient, and comprehensive. The aviation management portal loaded, showing me a clean interface with scheduling, maintenance records, flight plans, and passenger manifests. I navigated to tomorrow's scheduled flight and pulled up the full details. Flight plan filed, September 24, 07:42 a.m. Filed by Richard Ashford, CEO. Aircraft, Gulfstream G550, tail number N847 as. Departure, Private Terminal Metropolitan Airport, 10:00 a.m. Destination, Villana International Airport, Maldives. Passengers, 2, Richard Ashford, Stephanie Corwin. Purpose, Executive Strategic Planning. Executive Strategic Planning. The words made me want to laugh, except nothing about this was funny. Is that what they were calling it? Is that the lie Richard had written in the official flight plan, the justification for using company resources for a personal vacation? I sat back in my chair and looked out at the city sprawling below my windows. From up here, everything looked so orderly. The streets laid out in careful grids, the buildings rising in calculated heights, the tiny cars moving in predictable patterns. Order, structure, logic. My marriage was over. That thought arrived in my mind with absolute clarity, no emotion attached to it yet. Just a simple statement of fact, like observing that the sky was blue or water was wet. Richard was taking another woman to the Maldives on our private jet. There was no explaining that away, no innocent interpretation. No possible misunderstanding. My husband was having an affair. And he'd been stupid enough, arrogant enough, to book his romantic getaway using company resources that I had full access to. That's when the shock began to transform into something else, something cold and sharp and focused, because this wasn't just about a cheating husband anymore. This was about a business partner using corporate assets for personal gain. This was about fraud and theft and violations of every ethics policy we'd put in place. This was about a man who thought I was too busy, too trusting, too in love to notice what he was doing right under my nose. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. I started digging, not emotionally, not frantically, but methodically, like I was debugging code or auditing a system for vulnerabilities. I pulled up our corporate expense database and filtered for Richard's corporate card transactions. The system I designed tracked everything: date, amount, merchant, category, business purpose, approval status. I started scrolling through months of charges, and at first, everything looked normal. Client dinners, business travel expenses, office supplies, industry conference fees. All the expected costs of running a major corporation. But then I started seeing things that didn't quite fit. Small anomalies that individually meant nothing, but together painted a picture I couldn't unsee. A charge for a hotel room in Cabo San Lucas in July. Business purpose listed as Client Entertainment Martinez Group. Except we didn't have a client named Martinez Group. I would know. I reviewed every major client contract. A charge for dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Aspen in August. Business purpose. Investor relations, Mountain Capital Partners. I pulled up our investor database. Mountain Capital Partners wasn't in it. A charge for a spa package at a resort in Miami Beach. Business purpose. Strategic planning retreat. We hadn't had any strategic planning retreats in Miami. I cross-referenced these charges with our company calendar, with our official travel schedule, with the trips I knew about. And I started to see the gaps. The weekends Richard said he was going to golf tournaments or industry conferences or networking events. Times when I'd been too busy with product launches or client emergencies to pay close attention to exactly where he was or who he was with. He'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer. I pulled up our jet's flight history and started going through it systematically. Singapore, London, Tokyo, Dubai, Frankfurt, all legitimate business destinations where we had offices or major clients. I'd been on many of those flights myself. But there were others. Flights I didn't remember authorizing or hearing about. Small trips to vacation destinations that had nothing to do with our business operations. A weekend flight to the Cayman Islands. A 3-day trip to Bora Bora. A long weekend in Bali. All filed with vague business purposes that probably looked legitimate to whoever approved them in the aviation department, but made no sense when I actually examined them. I went deeper into the records, pulling up hotel reservations that had been billed to the company. The Ritz-Carlton Grand Cayman, 3 nights, charged to Richard's expense account. But only one room, one suite. Why would Richard need a luxury suite in the Cayman Islands for a business trip? We didn't even have clients there. Unless he wasn't alone. The 4 Seasons Bora Bora, 5 nights. 1 overwater villa, charged to corporate accounts under executive strategic planning. What strategic planning required a private villa in one of the most romantic destinations on Earth? The St. Regis Bali, 4 nights. Presidential suite. International partnership development. We didn't have any partnerships in Indonesia. We didn't have any business interests anywhere near Indonesia. I felt my hands start to shake, not with sadness but with rage. Pure, cold rage that felt like electricity in my veins. Richard hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been systematically stealing from our company to fund it. Every luxury hotel, every expensive dinner, every romantic getaway, all of it charged to Ashford Global Solutions. All of it paid for with money from the company we'd built together. Our company, the one I'd poured 15 years of my life into, the one I'd worked 80-hour weeks to build, the one I'd sacrificed friendships and hobbies and sleep and health to make successful. And Richard had been using it as his personal piggy bank for romance with a woman half his age. I needed to know when this started. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I started going back further in the records, looking for the first anomaly, the first unexplained charge, the first trip that didn't make sense. And I found it. 8 months ago, A flight to Las Vegas for the National Marketing Excellence Conference. That was a real event, one that Stephanie had attended as our newly hired head of marketing. It had made perfect sense for her to go. What hadn't made complete sense at the time, though I'd accepted Richard's explanation, was him deciding to go with her. "Want to see what the latest trends are in marketing?" he'd told me over dinner a week before the conference. "Stephanie's brilliant, but she's new to the company. I want to make sure she's networking with the right people, making the connections that will help us grow. Plus, it's Vegas. Might be fun to check out the conference and maybe see a show." I thought it was admirable. My husband, the engaged CEO, taking time to mentor a promising young employee. Making sure she had the support she needed to succeed in our organization. I'd kissed him goodbye at the airport and told him to have fun, to learn a lot, to bring back good ideas. What a complete and utter fool I'd been. I pulled up the expense reports from that trip, and there it was. The Bellagio, 3 nights, but not 2 separate rooms, one for the CEO and one for the head of marketing. Just one charge, one suite. Premier Fountain View Suite, to be exact. $4,000 a night billed to corporate accounts. That's where it started. That conference in Las Vegas 8 months ago. That's where Richard and Stephanie crossed the line from boss and employee to something else entirely. And ever since then, he'd been building this secret life with her, using our company resources to fund it, lying to me about where he was going and what he was doing. I created a new folder on our secure server, buried deep in the directory structure where no one would stumble across it unless they knew exactly where to look. And only I knew where to look. I'd built the architecture. I'd designed the security protocols. I knew every corner and shadow of our digital infrastructure. I started saving everything to that folder. Screenshots of flight records, copies of expense reports, hotel reservations, credit card statements, every piece of evidence documenting Richard's 8-month affair and his systematic theft of company funds. By the time I finished, it was past 2 in the afternoon. I'd missed lunch. I'd ignored 3 calls from my product development team. I'd skipped 2 meetings. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the truth spreading out before me in neat rows of data and damning evidence. Richard had been having an affair with Stephanie Corwin for 8 months. He'd taken her on at least 6 trips to romantic vacation destinations, all charged to company accounts. He'd spent over $200,000 of corporate money on hotels, restaurants, gifts, and experiences. He'd violated company ethics policies, probably broken laws about corporate fraud and fiduciary duty, and destroyed our marriage. And tomorrow morning, he was planning to board our $12 million jet and fly to the Maldives with her, probably thinking he'd gotten away with all of it. I sat in my office as the afternoon light shifted and changed, painting the city in different colors, and I felt something crystallize inside me. A decision, a plan, a purpose. I wasn't going to confront Richard. I wasn't going to cry or yell or beg for explanations. I wasn't going to give him the opportunity to lie to my face, to manipulate me with apologies and promises to change, to make me doubt what I knew to be true. I was going to let him think he'd gotten away with it. Let him board that plane tomorrow morning with his mistress. Let him relax into his lies, settle into his deception, start his romantic vacation. And then I was going to destroy him. Not with violence, not with anything crude or illegal, but with the same systems he'd been exploiting, with access and information and perfect timing, with the advantage that came from being the person who actually built the empire he thought he controlled. The plan started forming in my mind, piece by piece, like elegant code writing itself. It would be risky. It would require perfect execution. But if it worked, Richard would lose everything that mattered to him while I kept everything I'd built. And he'd have no one to blame but himself. I gathered my things and left the office at 5, driving home through rush hour traffic in a daze. Our house was in the hills overlooking the city. At the end of a private road, where each property sat on multiple acres of carefully landscaped privacy. We'd bought it 6 years ago after our second major acquisition, paying cash because we'd finally reached the point where we could. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and steel and clean lines, designed by an award-winning firm and featured in Architectural Digest. I'd worked closely with the architects on every detail, especially my home office with its floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the canyon and built-in shelves for my collection of first edition computer science texts. I'd loved this house. Loved waking up to views of the canyon, loved the way light poured through the windows, loved the infinity pool that seemed to spill out into the sky. It had felt like a reward for all the hard work, proof that we'd made it, that our dreams had become reality. Now, pulling into the circular driveway and seeing Richard's Tesla already parked in the garage, the house felt like a beautiful prison. A cage made of glass and lies and broken promises. Richard was on the terrace when I walked inside, standing at the railing with a glass of scotch in his hand, looking out at the view like a king surveying his kingdom. He was still in his work clothes, though he'd taken off his suit jacket and loosened his tie. At 45, he'd aged well. Regular workouts with his personal trainer kept him fit. The gray at his temples made him look distinguished rather than old. He was handsome in that classic, polished way that photographed well and looked good on magazine covers. Looking at him now, I felt absolutely nothing. No love, no attraction, not even anger in that moment. Just a cold, clinical assessment of a stranger wearing my husband's face. "There's my brilliant wife," he said when I stepped out onto the terrace, turning to give me that smile that used to make my heart skip. He crossed to me and kissed my cheek, his hand settling on my waist in a gesture that was supposed to be affectionate but felt possessive. "How was your day?" How was my day? My day of discovering that my entire marriage was a lie. My day of documenting evidence of your systematic betrayal and theft. "Productive," I said, and the word felt heavy with meaning he couldn't possibly understand. "Reviewed the quarterly reports. We're up 18% year over year across all divisions. The Singapore expansion is performing above initial projections. Looks like your trip tomorrow is well timed to capitalize on that momentum." Something flickered across his face. Just for a second. Was it guilt? Worry? But it was gone so fast I might have imagined it. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that," he said, taking a sip of his scotch. His voice was smooth, casual, like he was about to discuss something completely ordinary. "The Singapore situation has gotten a bit more complicated. Some regulatory issues with the manufacturing plant approval. Might need to be there longer than I initially thought. Maybe a week, possibly 10 days. Lies, such smooth, practiced lies falling from his lips like he'd rehearsed them. 10 days is a long time, I said, keeping my voice neutral, mildly concerned, playing my role perfectly. That's longer than we discussed. Should I plan to join you for part of it? I could probably rearrange my schedule, come for the second half once the regulatory meetings are done. No, he said quickly, too quickly. It's going to be incredibly boring, sitting in government offices dealing with bureaucratic paperwork. You'd hate every minute of it. Besides, you've got the encryption protocol launched to oversee next week. That's critical. Better if you stay here and make sure that goes smoothly. More lies to cover the initial lie. A whole infrastructure of deception he'd built so carefully. If you're sure, I said doubtfully, still playing the concerned wife who trusted her husband's judgment. I'm sure, he said, pulling me closer, his arm around my shoulders. This way we've got both fronts covered. You handle the product launch, I handle the regulatory nightmare. We're a good team, Vic. Vic, his nickname for me, short for Victoria, spoken with affection and familiarity. Once upon a time, I'd loved hearing him call me that. Now it felt like another lie, another manipulation. We stood there on the terrace together, the evening air carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden, the lights of the city beginning to twinkle below as the sun set. To anyone watching from a distance, we would have looked like the perfect power couple. Successful, attractive, comfortable with each other in the way that comes from years of partnership. The reality was so far from that image, it was almost laughable. Actually, I said carefully, I've been thinking about taking a few days off while you're gone. Maybe visit Cassie in Portland. She's been asking me to come see the new house, and I haven't had a real break in months. Might be good to just decompress for a bit. Richard's entire face lit up. Genuine enthusiasm and relief flooded his features. Of course. If I was safely in Portland, I'd be nowhere near our corporate headquarters. No chance of me discovering he hadn't actually gone to Singapore. No risk of me calling the Singapore office and finding out he'd never arrived. "That's a fantastic idea, Vic," he said with obvious excitement. "You've been working yourself ragged. A few days with your sister would be perfect. When's the last time you saw Cassie? Christmas." "Almost a year," I said. It was true. My younger sister and I had always been close, but between building the company and managing everything, I rarely made time for personal trips. Another sacrifice I'd made for Ashford Global Solutions. Another piece of my life I'd given up while Richard was sneaking around behind my back. "Then it's settled," Richard said decisively. "I'll handle the regulatory mess in Singapore. You go relax with your sister in Portland. We'll both come back refreshed and ready to crush the fourth quarter." He sounded so sincere, so genuinely caring about my well-being and work-life balance. He'd always been a good liar. I just hadn't known how good until now. We went inside and had dinner together. Our housekeeper, Maria, had left chicken piccata warming in the oven with roasted vegetables and a Caesar salad. We sat at the dining room table, something we only did a few times a week since we were usually both too busy or eating at different times. Richard talked about the company, about a new contract we were bidding on with a major pharmaceutical company, about whether we should open a new office in Austin or expand our Boston location, about some personnel issue in our London office that needed attention. Normal dinner conversation, business partner conversation, the kind of talk we'd had thousands of times over 15 years of building a company together. All while he was mentally preparing to board a plane with another woman in less than 15 hours. I played my part perfectly, asked questions, offered opinions, discussed strategy and priorities. Anyone listening would have heard two colleagues who respected each other's judgment, two partners who communicated well and shared a vision for their company's future. "You seem a little quiet tonight," Richard said at one point, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Everything okay? You're not coming down with something, are you?" I looked down at his hand covering mine. The same hand that had slipped a wedding ring on my finger 17 years ago at that vineyard in Napa Valley. The same hand that had held mine through my father's funeral 5 years ago, squeezing gently while I cried. The same hand that had probably touched Stephanie's skin, run through her blonde hair, pulled her close in hotel rooms paid for with our company's money. "Just tired," I said, which was true. I was exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. Tired of the lies. Tired of performing. Tired of being married to a stranger. "It's been a long quarter. I think some time in Portland really will help." "Absolutely," he agreed. "You need to take better care of yourself, Vic. The company needs you healthy and sharp." The company needs me. Not I need you, or I miss you when we're apart, or I love you and want you to be happy. The company needs me. How long had it been since Richard told me he loved me and actually meant it? How long had our marriage been about business rather than love? Had there ever been real love, or had I always just been useful to him? The brilliant technical mind that built the products while he took credit and reaped rewards. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Richard turned on the evening news while I pretended to read a book on my tablet. The evening stretched out with comfortable silence between us, the kind of quiet that comes from years of being together, of not needing to fill every moment with conversation. Except it wasn't comfortable anymore. It was suffocating. Every minute that ticked by felt like an eternity. Every breath felt forced. I wanted to scream at him, to throw something, to demand answers to questions I already knew the answers to. But I didn't. I sat there quietly, playing the role of the unsuspecting wife, waiting for the right moment to strike. At 10 o'clock, Richard stood and stretched. "I should probably get to bed. Early flight tomorrow. Need to be at the hangar by 9:30. "What time does the plane leave?" I asked, even though I already knew. I'd pulled up the flight plan. I'd read every detail. 10 o'clock, he said. "Should land in Singapore around." He paused, and I watched him calculate, probably trying to remember what the actual flight time to the Maldives was while pretending to think about Singapore. Around 16 hours later with the routing and time difference. More lies. So many lies he had to keep track of them all. "I'll make sure I'm up to see you off," I said. Something crossed his face again. He didn't want me there. Didn't want me anywhere near the hangar where I might see him boarding with Stephanie. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. Sleep in. You need the rest." "I want to," I insisted gently. "I always see you off for big trips." He couldn't argue with that without arousing suspicion. "Okay," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But don't set an alarm. If you're still asleep, I'll just kiss you goodbye and let you rest." He would never kiss me goodbye again. I knew that with absolute certainty. This was the last night I would spend under the same roof with Richard Ashford as his wife. After tomorrow, everything would change. "I'll be up," I said firmly. He came over and kissed me goodnight, his lips brushing my forehead in a gesture that was supposed to be tender but felt mechanical. Performed. A role he was playing rather than genuine affection. "Love you, Vic," he said. "Love you too," I replied automatically, and the words felt like ash in my mouth. I watched him walk up the stairs to our bedroom, and I wondered how many more lies he'd tell himself tonight, how he'd justify his actions, how he'd sleep peacefully while planning to betray me tomorrow. I stayed downstairs for another hour, sitting in the dark living room, looking out at the city lights spreading below our hillside home. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Richard moving around in our bedroom above. Tomorrow morning, Richard would wake up and prepare for what he thought would be a romantic escape with his mistress. He'd pack his carefully selected vacation clothes, pretend they were appropriate for business meetings. He'd say goodbye to me, maybe kiss me one last time, lie to my face one final time. He'd drive to the private hangar where our jet was kept, meet Stephanie, and board the plane together, thinking they'd successfully deceived me. And they'd take off, climbing into the sky, believing they were heading to paradise. But they wouldn't end up in the Maldives, because I was about to change everything. The plan was fully formed in my mind now, every detail mapped out like clean, efficient code. It was risky. It required perfect timing and absolute precision. But if it worked, if I executed it flawlessly, Richard would lose everything that mattered to him while I kept everything I'd built. The company I'd created, the reputation I'd earned, the future I deserved. All I had to do was wait for morning. When I finally went upstairs, it was nearly midnight. The house was dark except for the soft glow of landscape lighting filtering through the windows. I moved quietly through the hallway, past the guest rooms we'd optimistically set up for children that never came, past the home gym Richard used religiously every morning, past the office we'd designed to share but rarely used at the same time anymore. Our bedroom door was open. Richard was already asleep, sprawled across his side of the California king bed in the way he always slept when he felt relaxed and secure. One arm flung out, face peaceful, breathing deep and even. He looked innocent in sleep, younger, like the man I'd married all those years ago who'd promised me forever. I stood in the doorway for a long moment just watching him, memorizing this, not because I still loved him, but because I wanted to remember this moment. The last time Richard Ashford would sleep peacefully. The last night he'd rest easy, thinking he'd outsmarted me, thinking his secrets were safe. After tomorrow, he'd never have another peaceful night again. I got ready for bed in the dark, moving through the familiar routine on autopilot. Washing my face, brushing my teeth, changing into the silk pajamas Richard had bought me for my last birthday. Everything the same as always, everything completely different. I slid into bed on my side, keeping as much distance as possible between us in the expanse of expensive mattress. The sheets were cool and smooth, high thread count Egyptian cotton that cost more than most people spent on rent. We'd bought them in Italy during a trip to Rome 3 years ago. Or was that trip real? Had that been a legitimate business expansion meeting, or was that another lie? Had Richard been with someone else even then? How far back did the lies go? Had there been others before Stephanie? Was she just the latest or the first? How much of my marriage had been real and how much had been performance? I lay there in the dark, listening to Richard breathe and let my mind work through the problem like it was a complex algorithm that needed solving. Because that's what this was, really. A problem to be solved, variables to be managed, outcomes to be calculated and controlled. The affair itself was clear. 8 months, documented trips, evidence of theft from company funds. That was straightforward. But I needed to understand more. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I could finalize my plan. Tomorrow morning, Richard would leave. That gave me hours before I needed to act. Hours to dig deeper into places I hadn't looked yet. Sleep seemed impossible, but eventually exhaustion pulled me under. I dreamed of drowning in tropical water, of sinking beneath turquoise waves while Richard stood on a beach with a blonde woman, watching me disappear and not reaching out to help. I woke at 5:30, my internal clock reliable even without an alarm. The room was still dark, the sun not yet risen. Next to me, Richard slept on, undisturbed. I slipped out of bed silently and went downstairs. The house was quiet. Maria wouldn't arrive until 8. I had the space entirely to myself. I made coffee in our state-of-the-art espresso machine, the kind with more buttons than seemed necessary, and carried the cup to my home office. This room was my sanctuary within the sanctuary, smaller than my office downtown but more personal. Built-in bookshelves held my collection of computer science texts dating back to college, mixed with framed photos from different stages of my life. My degree from MIT, a picture of my parents at my graduation, photos of Cassie and me as kids before the world got complicated, and photos of Richard and me, so many photos of us together, building the company, attending events, celebrating milestones, the visual history of a relationship that I'd thought was real. I set my coffee down and opened my laptop. Time to go deeper. I started with Stefana's digital footprint within the company, email records, calendar entries, project files. As CTO, I had access to everything, though I rarely used that access. We had privacy policies, protocols, professional boundaries. But those boundaries didn't apply when investigating corporate fraud. I pulled up her email history and started searching for messages to or from Richard. There were hundreds. Most were work-related, at least on the surface. Updates on marketing campaigns, reports on client engagement, discussions of strategy and positioning. But scattered among the professional correspondence were messages that made my stomach turn. Nothing explicit, nothing that would be obvious to someone glancing through. But once you knew what to look for, the subtext was clear. From Richard, 2 months ago, yesterday's strategy session was incredibly productive. You challenge me to think differently. That's a rare gift. From Stefana in response, working with you is the highlight of my day. Every day, I'm learning so much. From Richard, 6 weeks ago, thinking about our conversation last night. You're right, sometimes we get so caught up in responsibilities that we forget to make time for joy. From Stefana, joy is underrated. We should prioritize it more. I know I want to. From Richard, 3 weeks ago, the presentation you gave today was brilliant. Watching you command that room, seeing everyone respond to your ideas, I was proud. Is that inappropriate? Probably, but it's true. From Stephanie, not inappropriate at all. Your opinion matters more to me than anyone else's. You know that. I read through message after message, watching their relationship evolve in carefully coded language. To anyone else, it would look like a mentor and mentee building a professional rapport. But I could see the progression, the growing intimacy, the increasing inappropriateness barely disguised under professional terminology. And Richard had been careful. He'd never used his company email to book hotels or make explicitly personal plans. Those communications must have happened on personal phones, through text messages or apps that wouldn't leave traces in our corporate system. But he hadn't been careful enough, because he'd forgotten that I could access more than just emails. I pulled up our building's security logs. Another system I'd helped implement, another piece of infrastructure I had complete access to. Key card scans tracked when employees entered and exited, which floors they accessed, when they used conference rooms or private offices. I filtered for Richard's executive floor access after business hours, and there it was, a pattern I'd never noticed because I'd never been looking. Late-night office access, 2 or 3 times a week, over the past several months. Richard's key card scanning into the executive floor at 8 or 9 p.m., sometimes as late as 10. That wasn't unusual by itself. We both worked late often. But then Stephanie's key card, scanning in 5 to 10 minutes after Richard's, and both of them staying for hours, both exiting together, sometimes at midnight or 1 in the morning. I cross-referenced those dates with my own calendar and felt sick. Nights when I'd been traveling for business. Nights when I'd been home, but working from my home office on urgent projects. Nights when I'd been at industry conferences or client meetings. Richard and Stephanie had been using our office, our building, our company's space for their affair. While I was working myself to exhaustion to keep the business running, they were meeting in his corner office with its private bathroom and leather couch. The rage that flooded through me was so intense I had to set down my coffee cup before I threw it. My hands were shaking, my breath coming fast and shallow. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm upstairs and drag Richard out of bed and demand explanations. But I didn't. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to calm down, to think. Emotions were data too, but they couldn't drive my decisions. Not now, not when I needed to be strategic. I saved screenshots of the security logs to my encrypted folder. More evidence, more proof of systematic deception. Then I dug into the financial records more thoroughly. I'd looked at Richard's corporate card yesterday, but now I went deeper. Personal accounts that we shared. Credit cards I'd never paid much attention to because we had enough money that I didn't need to track every purchase. I logged into our personal banking portal. We had joint accounts for household expenses, separate accounts for individual spending, and various investment accounts managed by our wealth advisor. I'd always handled the business finances while Richard managed our personal money. Division of labor that made sense when you trusted your partner. I started reviewing Richard's personal credit card statements, going back months. And there it was. More evidence, more lies, more systematic deception. Charges at jewelry stores. Tiffany, Cartier, Bulgari, thousands of dollars on items he'd never given to me. Who received those gifts? Stephanie, other women before her. Charges at lingerie boutiques. La Perla, agent provocateur. Expensive, intimate items that I'd never seen. Not meant for me. Charges at florists. Weekly deliveries to an address I didn't recognize. I looked it up. A luxury apartment building downtown. I pulled up the building's website and my stomach dropped. Those weren't just apartments. They were high-end corporate rentals, fully furnished units available for short-term or long-term lease. Had Richard rented an apartment? A place where he could meet Stephanie without using hotels, without creating paper trails in company expense reports. I called the building's leasing office, preparing a lie. But before I could speak, an automated system answered. Thank you for calling Metropolitan Luxury Residences. If you're calling about Unit 4507, currently leased to Ashford Corporate Services, please press 1. Ashford Corporate Services, one of our shell companies, established years ago for legitimate business purposes. Richard had used it to lease an apartment. For how long? For what purpose other than the obvious? I hung up without pressing anything. I didn't need to talk to anyone. I knew enough. Richard hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been building an entire alternate life, an apartment where he could play house with Stephanie, regular flower deliveries to that address, jewelry and gifts, late nights at the office that turned into late nights at that apartment. How often had he told me he was working late when he was really with her? How many times had he come home smelling like her perfume, touching me with hands that had just touched her, lying to my face while I believed every word? I felt like I was going to be sick. I stood up from my desk and walked to the windows, looking out at the canyon as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful. The world was beautiful and terrible at the same time. My marriage was more than over. It had been over for a long time. I just hadn't known it. I heard movement upstairs. Richard was awake. I checked the time, 6:30. He'd be down soon, ready to start his day, ready to leave for his romantic vacation disguised as a business trip. I had to pull myself together, had to perform for just a few more hours. After he left, after he was in the air, then I could fall apart if I needed to. But not yet. I closed my laptop and went to the kitchen. Started making breakfast like this was a normal morning. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit. The routine motions helped calm me, gave me something to do with my hands. Richard came down at 7, already showered and dressed in vacation casual clothes disguised as business travel attire. Expensive jeans, a linen button-down, Italian loafers that cost $1,000. He looked good. He always looked good. "You're up early," he said, surprised. "I thought you'd sleep in." "Wanted to make you breakfast before you left," I said, plating eggs and toast. "Big trip ahead." Something flickered across his face. Guilt? Probably not. Richard didn't seem capable of genuine guilt anymore. Maybe just discomfort that I was being nice when he was planning to betray me. "You didn't have to do that," he said, but he sat down and ate. We made small talk about his trip. About my plans to visit Cassie, about when we'd both be back. More lies, easier lies now that he was practiced. At 8:30, he stood up. I should get going, want to be at the hangar with time to spare. Of course. I walked him to the door, playing the dutiful wife one final time. He kissed me goodbye, on the lips, his hand cupping my face. "Love you, Vic, I'll call you when I land." "Safe flight," I said. I stood in the doorway and watched him load his bag into his Tesla. Watched him back out of the driveway. Watched him drive away down our private road, heading to the airport, heading to meet Stephanie, heading toward the trap I was about to spring. The moment his car disappeared from view, I went back inside and pulled out my phone. Time to set everything in motion. My first call was to Daniel Wright, our aviation director. Dan was a former Air Force pilot, late 40s, professional and competent. He'd been managing our aviation operations for 5 years, handling everything from flight scheduling to maintenance to crew management. He answered immediately. "Mrs. Ashford, good morning." "Dan, I need you to do something for me," I said, keeping my voice calm and authoritative. "And I need absolute confidentiality, not a word to anyone, including Mr. Ashford. Can I trust you with this?" There was only a brief pause. Dan was smart enough to know when something significant was happening. "Of course, Mrs. Ashford, you have my complete discretion." "Richard's flight this morning. I need the routing changed." Silence, then changed to where? "I'm sending you coordinates now." I pulled up the file I'd prepared and sent it to his secure email. "The passengers believe they're flying to the Maldives. The original flight plan Richard filed shows the Maldives, but I need that aircraft to land somewhere else, somewhere very specific." "Mrs. Ashford," Dan said carefully, "changing a flight plan without passenger notification is unusual. If there's a safety concern—" "There's no safety concern," I interrupted. "The plane will land at a fully equipped, fully operational private airfield. Everything will be completely safe and by the book. I just need the passengers to arrive somewhere other than where they expect. Somewhere that will give them time to think about their choices." Another pause while Dan processed this. "The coordinates you sent are in Montana, middle of nowhere. This is about more than just a route change, isn't it?" "Yes," I said simply, "but I need you to trust me. Can you make this happen without alerting the passengers before takeoff?" "I can file an amended flight plan that won't populate to the cockpit display until after departure," Dan said slowly. "The pilots report to me. They'll follow my instructions. But Mrs. Ashford, if this goes wrong—" "It won't go wrong," I said firmly. "I've thought through every detail. The plane lands safely. The passengers are inconvenienced and strand far from their intended destination. That's all. No danger, no legal issues, nothing that violates any regulations." "Understood," Dan said. "Consider it done. The amended flight plan will be filed under my authority as aviation director. It'll show as a routing change for weather avoidance or airspace optimization. Standard procedure." Thank you, Dan. I won't forget this. Mrs. Ashford, whatever's happening, I hope you know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said, and ended the call. I pulled up the coordinates for the Montana airfield one more time, looking at satellite images of the remote location. It had been a questionable investment 4 years ago, purchased through a shell company for a business park development that never materialized. The airfield itself was former military, decommissioned and sold off, then purchased by our shell company. It was completely operational, maintained to federal standards because we'd never formally closed it. But it was in the middle of absolutely nowhere. The nearest town was 40 miles away. The nearest major city was 3 hours by car. There was a small office building, a hangar, and nothing else for miles in any direction. When Richard and Stephanie landed there instead of in tropical paradise, they'd be stranded. Confused, probably angry, and they'd have nowhere to go and no easy way to leave. It was petty, maybe, but it was also perfect. Changing the flight routing would humiliate Richard and ruin his romantic getaway. But that was just the opening move, just the first piece of a much larger plan, because I wasn't just trying to embarrass my cheating husband. I was going to systematically dismantle everything he thought he'd built, everything he thought he controlled. I was going to take back my company, my reputation, my life. And I was going to do it so thoroughly that Richard would never recover. I spent the next hour preparing the evidence package I'd been compiling. Every flight record, every expense report, every hotel bill, every piece of documentation showing Richard's 8-month affair and his systematic theft of company resources. I organized it into a professional report, formatted like the security audits our IT department regularly produced. Clean, factual, comprehensive. Executive summary at the front, detailed evidence in appendices, financial calculations showing the total cost to the company. $237,000. That's what Richard had stolen from Ashford Global Solutions to fund his affair. Company jet usage for personal trips, luxury hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts, and the corporate apartment rental, all charged to various business accounts with fraudulent justifications. It was more than enough to trigger an ethics investigation, more than enough to justify termination for cause, possibly enough for criminal charges if we wanted to pursue them. I drafted an email to our general counsel, Helen Zhao. Helen was brilliant, ruthless when needed, and fiercely protective of the company's interests. She'd been with us for 8 years, since we were big enough to need a dedicated legal department. The email was carefully worded, professional, concerned, the vigilant co-founder discovering potential fraud and bringing it to the attention of appropriate authorities. Helen, I've uncovered some irregularities in corporate expense reporting that require immediate investigation. Please review the attached documentation and advise on appropriate next steps. This appears to involve misuse of company resources by a senior executive, possibly rising to the level of fraud. We need to address this quickly to protect the company's interests and ensure compliance with our fiduciary duties. Please keep this confidential until we determine the appropriate course of action. I attached the full evidence package and saved the email as a draft, not sending it yet. Timing was critical. Then I drafted a second email, this one to our board of directors. We had 7 board members, myself, Richard, 3 independent directors with expertise in technology and finance, and 2 investor representatives from our major venture capital backers. This email was more formal, more serious. A notification of potential executive misconduct requiring board action. Board members, I am writing to inform you of a serious matter requiring immediate attention. I have discovered evidence suggesting systematic misappropriation of corporate funds by a senior executive. The attached documentation shows unauthorized personal use of company assets, including our corporate aircraft and expense accounts, totaling over $230,000. This conduct violates our ethics policies, potentially breaches fiduciary duties, and may constitute fraud. I am requesting an emergency board meeting to address this situation and determine appropriate disciplinary action. Given the sensitivity of this matter, please keep this communication strictly confidential until we can convene. I attached the same evidence package and saved this as a draft too. Finally, I drafted an email to our head of human resources, Patricia Morrison. Patricia was thorough, fair, and absolutely by the book when it came to company policies and employee conduct. Patricia, I need to report a serious ethics violation that requires HR investigation. Evidence suggests a C-level executive has engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate employee while simultaneously misusing company resources. This creates significant liability for the company and violates multiple policies in our employee handbook. Please review the attached documentation and initiate appropriate proceedings. We need to move quickly to protect the company's interests. 3 emails, 3 different angles of attack: legal, governance, and human resources. By the time Richard landed in Montana and realized something was wrong, his entire professional life would be imploding. But I still wasn't sending them. Not yet. I needed the timing to be perfect. I checked my watch. 9:45 a.m. Richard would be at the hangar now, meeting Stephanie, boarding the plane. They'd be settled into the luxurious cabin soon, accepting champagne from our flight attendant, relaxing into their deception. The jet was scheduled to depart at 10. Dan had confirmed the amended flight plan was filed. The pilots had their instructions. Everything was set. I just had to wait. At 10:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Dan. Wheels up. Departure on schedule. All systems normal. They were in the air, Richard and Stephanie, climbing toward cruising altitude, thinking they were heading to paradise, probably already celebrating, already relaxing into what they thought would be a romantic week in the Maldives. They had no idea what was coming. I pulled up the flight tracking system on my laptop. Another piece of infrastructure I had access to, another system I'd helped implement. I could see our jet's position in real time, watch its progress across the map. The plane climbed to 35,000 feet and leveled off, heading northeast instead of southwest. Richard probably hadn't noticed yet. He wasn't a pilot. He wouldn't know the exact routing or heading. As long as the plane was in the air and the flight attendant was serving champagne, he'd assume everything was going according to plan. Dan had said the amended flight plan would populate to the cockpit about 2 hours into the flight, at the point where they'd be too far from our home airport to turn back without fuel concerns. That meant around noon, Richard would discover something was wrong. I had 2 hours to prepare for what came next. I called my sister Cassie. She answered on the second ring, sounding surprised. Vic, hey, is everything okay? You're usually in meetings at this time. Not today, I said, and my voice cracked slightly despite my efforts to stay composed. Cassie, I need to ask you something. Can I really come stay with you for a while, like starting today? Of course, she said immediately, concern flooding her voice. What's wrong? What happened? Richard's been having an affair, I said, and speaking the words out loud to someone who loved me made them real in a way they hadn't been before. For 8 months, with an employee. He's been stealing from the company to pay for it. And this morning he got on our jet with her, thinking they were going to the Maldives for a romantic vacation. Oh my God, Vic, I'm so sorry. Yes, absolutely, come here. Come right now, how far away are you? About 6 hours if I leave soon. I need to be somewhere else when everything explodes. I need to be away from this house, this city, all of it. I understand, Cassie said softly. Drive safe, okay? And Vic, I'm so proud of you. For what? For being stupid enough to not see what was happening in my own marriage. For being strong enough to do something about it, she said firmly. A lot of women would just fall apart or try to pretend it wasn't happening. You're taking action. That takes courage. After we hung up, I went upstairs and started packing. Not just a weekend bag, but enough clothes and essentials for an extended stay. I didn't know when I'd be ready to come back to this house. Maybe never. I moved through the bedroom I'd shared with Richard, pulling clothes from my closet, gathering toiletries from our bathroom. Every item felt heavy with memory. The dress I'd worn to our anniversary dinner last year. The perfume Richard had given me for Christmas. The framed photo on my nightstand of us at the beach, laughing, happy, in love. Or what I'd thought was love. I picked up the photo and looked at it closely. When was this taken? 3 years ago? 4? Was Richard already thinking about cheating then? Or had I had his full heart at some point before something changed, before I became insufficient? Stop it, I told myself firmly. This isn't about you being insufficient. This is about him being a liar and a cheat. Don't internalize his failures. I put the photo face down on the nightstand and finished packing. By 11:30, my car was loaded. I stood in the entryway of the house, looking around one last time. This beautiful home that had felt like such an achievement, proof that we'd made it, that our dreams had come true. It all felt hollow now, empty. Just expensive furniture and pretty views and the ghost of a marriage that had died without me even noticing. I locked the door behind me and got in my car, started the engine, pulled out of the driveway without looking back. As I drove down the hillside toward the highway, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Richard. It was only 11:45. They shouldn't have discovered the route change yet. Why was he calling? I let it go to voicemail. Whatever he wanted, whatever excuse or lie he'd prepared, I didn't want to hear it yet. The phone immediately rang again. Richard, persistent. I ignored it again. A text message appeared. Vic, need to talk. Call me when you get this. Another call, another text. He was getting anxious about something. Finally, at noon exactly, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered this time. Mrs. Ashford? It was Captain James Morrison, our senior pilot. I apologize for the interruption, but Mr. Ashford is requesting to speak with you. We have a situation regarding the flight routing. Put him on, I said calmly. There was a moment of muffled conversation, then Richard's voice came through, tight with barely controlled anger. Victoria, what the hell is going on? Where is this plane going? Not to the Maldives, I said simply. Did you really think I wouldn't find out, Richard? Did you honestly believe I was that blind, that stupid, that trusting? Silence, complete silence except for the background noise of the aircraft. Vic, I can explain. Don't, I cut him off sharply. Do not insult me with more lies. I know everything. 8 months of trips with Stephanie, the apartment you rented downtown, the jewelry and gifts, the late nights at the office, $237,000 of company money spent on your affair, every single lie you've told me while I worked myself to exhaustion building the company you've been stealing from. More silence, then quieter, almost scared. Where is the plane going? Somewhere remote where you and Stephanie can have a long, honest conversation about what happens next, I said. You'll land safely, don't worry, but your romantic vacation is over before it started. And Richard, by the time you read your emails, your career at Ashford Global Solutions will be over too. You can't do this, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice, just fear. I already did, I replied coldly. You destroyed our marriage. You stole from our company. You violated every policy and principle we built this business on. I'm just making sure there are consequences. Enjoy Montana, Richard. I hear it's beautiful this time of year, though not quite as warm as the Maldives. I hung up and blocked his number. Then I pulled over to the side of the highway, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. This was it, the point of no return. Once I sent those emails, everything would be set in motion. The board would convene. Legal would investigate. HR would initiate proceedings. Richard's affair would be exposed. His theft would be documented. His position would be terminated. Our marriage would be publicly over. Was I ready for this? For the chaos and attention and mess that would follow? I thought about Richard's face when he'd kissed me goodbye this morning. The casual ease of his lies. The way he'd looked at me with fake affection while planning to spend the week with another woman. I thought about Stephanie, young and ambitious, probably thinking Richard would leave his wife for her, not realizing she was just another conquest, another ego boost for a middle-aged man scared of his own mortality. I thought about the apartment Richard had rented, the secret life he'd built, the systematic way he'd deceived me while I trusted him completely. Yes, I was ready. I pulled out my laptop, connected to my phone's hotspot, and opened my email. Found the 3 draft messages I'd prepared. To our general counsel, to the board of directors, to human resources. I took a deep breath and hit send on all 3. The emails went out simultaneously, each one landing in inboxes with evidence that would destroy Richard's career and reputation. Each one setting in motion processes that couldn't be stopped or reversed. Within minutes, my phone started ringing. Helen Zha, our general counsel. Victoria, I just read your email. Are you absolutely certain about these allegations? Completely certain, I said. I've documented everything thoroughly. Flight records, expense reports, security logs, bank statements. It's all in the evidence package. This is serious, Helen said. If even half of what you've documented is accurate, we're looking at termination for cause at minimum, possibly criminal charges for fraud. I know, I said. That's why I brought it to your attention immediately. The company needs to protect itself. Where are you right now? Can you come to the office? The board is going to want to meet as soon as possible. I'm actually leaving town for a few days, I said. Family emergency, but I'm available by phone or video conference. And Helen, everything you need is in that documentation. I've built an airtight case. I can see that, she said, and there was something like admiration in her voice. Victoria, this must be incredibly difficult for you personally. My personal feelings are separate from my responsibility to the company, I said, keeping my voice professional. Richard violated policies and trust. The company has to respond appropriately, regardless of our personal relationship. After I hung up with Helen, the board members started calling. First, Mugret Chun, one of our independent directors and a former CEO herself. Then David Rodriguez from our lead investment firm. Each call was similar. Shock, concern, questions about the evidence, discussions about next steps. I handled each conversation calmly and professionally. The wronged business partner discovering fraud, not the betrayed wife falling apart. That distinction was critical. By 2 in the afternoon, I was back on the highway, heading north toward Portland. Behind me, metaphorically and literally, the life I'd known was imploding. Richard's career was being dismantled. His reputation was being destroyed. His affair was being exposed. And I was driving away from all of it, toward my sister's house, toward space to breathe and think and figure out who I was outside of being Richard Ushkid's wife. My phone buzzed with another call from an unknown number. I answered it. Mrs. Ushkat? It was Dan Wright, our aviation director. I wanted to update you. The aircraft landed in Montana at 1:47 p.m. local time. Both passengers disembarked. They're currently at the airfield office trying to arrange ground transportation. Good, I said. Thank you for handling this so professionally, Dan. Mrs. Ashford, if I may say so, whatever happened between you and Mr. Ashford, I hope you know that a lot of us have tremendous respect for you. You built this company as much as he did. More, in some people's opinion. I appreciate that, Dan. There's one more thing, he said hesitantly. Mr. Ashford requested that the pilots fly him back immediately. I told him that wouldn't be possible without your authorization as co-owner of the aircraft. A small smile crossed my face. That's correct. The jet stays in Montana until I say otherwise. Understood. I'll make sure the crew knows. After that call ended, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear Richard's calls or read his texts. Didn't want to deal with the barrage of messages that would be coming as the news spread through the company. I just wanted to drive, to put miles between myself and the wreckage of my marriage, to move forward, literally and figuratively. The highway stretched out ahead of me, cutting through autumn landscape painted in gold and red and orange. The sky was that perfect blue that only happens on clear fall days. The world was beautiful, despite everything. I'd lost my husband, my marriage, the life I thought I was building. But I still had my company, my skills, my future. I still had my brilliant mind and my work ethic and my determination. I still had my sister waiting for me, a safe place to land while I figured out my next moves. And I had the satisfaction of knowing that Richard was stranded in Montana with his mistress, watching his entire life collapse around him, knowing that the woman he'd underestimated had orchestrated his downfall with surgical precision. That satisfaction felt better than I'd expected. Cold, maybe, hard, but deeply, thoroughly satisfying. Richard had thought I was too busy to notice his affair, too trusting to question his lies, too devoted to the marriage to do anything even if I found out. He'd been wrong about all of it. And now he was paying the price for underestimating Victoria Chen, not Victoria Ashford, not his wife or his business partner or his colleague. Victoria Chen, the brilliant programmer who'd built a billion-dollar company from scratch, the strategic thinker who could solve impossible problems, the woman who, when pushed too far, pushed back with devastating effectiveness. I drove north through the afternoon, leaving behind the city and the company and the husband who'd betrayed me, driving toward Portland, toward my sister, toward whatever came next. The revenge was just beginning. The flight diversion was just the opening move. Over the coming days and weeks, I would systematically take apart everything Richard thought he controlled, everything he thought he'd built. And when I was done, he'd understand exactly what he'd lost when he decided I wasn't enough. He'd lost everything. I arrived at Cassie's house just before 6 in the evening. She lived in a beautiful old Portland neighborhood with tree-lined streets and craftsman-style homes that had character and history. Her house was smaller than mine, warmer somehow, with flower boxes in the windows and a front porch with rocking chairs. She was waiting at the door when I pulled up, and the moment I saw her face, something inside me finally cracked. My younger sister, 2 years my junior, with the same dark eyes and high cheekbones but a softer expression. Less driven, more content. She'd chosen a different path than me, teaching high school literature instead of building tech empires, and right then, her path looked infinitely more peaceful. "Oh, Vic," she said, pulling me into a hug before I'd even made it up the porch steps. And I broke. Right there on her front porch, I finally let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage, the grief for a marriage that had died without me even noticing. I cried against my sister's shoulder like I hadn't cried since our father's funeral, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. "I've got you," Cassie murmured, holding me tight. "I've got you, and you're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay." We went inside, to her cozy living room with its worn furniture and bookshelves crammed with novels and mismatched mugs. So different from my minimalist glass house with its designer everything. This felt like a home. My house had felt like a showroom. Cassie made tea and we sat on her comfortable couch, and I told her everything. The discovery of the affair, the evidence I'd compiled, the flight diversion, the emails I'd sent to the board and legal team. All of it spilled out in a rush of words and tears. "So right now," Cassie said slowly, processing everything, "Richard is stranded in Montana with his mistress, realizing his whole life is falling apart." "Yes," I said. "Good," she said fiercely. "That's exactly what he deserves. Vic, I know this hurts. I know you loved him. But what he did, the systematic lying, the stealing, the disrespect, it's unforgivable." "I keep wondering what I did wrong," I admitted. "What I could have done differently. Was I too focused on work, too busy, not attractive enough anymore, not fun enough?" "Stop," Cassie said firmly. "This is not about you. This is about Richard making selfish, destructive choices. You built a billion-dollar company. You were an equal partner in your marriage and business. You did nothing wrong except trust someone who didn't deserve it." We talked late into the night, until exhaustion finally pulled me under. I slept in Cassie's guest room, in a bed with a handmade quilt and the sound of rain starting to fall outside. It was the first real sleep I'd had in days. But even in sleep, I couldn't escape. I dreamed of Richard and Stephanie on a plane that never landed, flying in circles forever. I dreamed of our wedding, except when Richard lifted my veil, it was a stranger's face underneath. I dreamed of standing in an empty office building, calling for help, but no sound coming out. I woke at dawn, disoriented and aching. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then it all came crashing back. Richard, the affair, everything I'd set in motion yesterday. I checked my phone, which I'd finally turned back on. 43 missed calls, 67 text messages, dozens of emails. Most were from Richard. Angry texts, pleading voicemails, desperate emails. I deleted them all without reading or listening. I didn't care what he had to say. There was nothing he could tell me that would change anything. But there were also messages from the board members, from Helen, our general counsel, from Patricia in HR. Those I needed to read. Helen had sent a detailed email at 9 p.m. the previous night. Victoria, I've completed a preliminary review of the evidence you provided. This is extremely serious. I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Can you join via video conference? We need your testimony about what you discovered and when. I've also initiated a formal investigation through our external legal firm to ensure complete objectivity. Richard has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending the outcome. Please call me when you're available. Administrative leave. They'd moved fast. I felt a grim satisfaction at that. Patricia from HR had sent a similar message. Mrs. Ashford, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. Per company policy on executive misconduct, I've initiated a formal ethics investigation. Both Mr. Ashford and Ms. Corwin have been placed on administrative leave. I'll need to schedule interviews with you and other relevant parties. Please advise your availability. Both of them on leave. Stephanie, too. Of course, she was complicit in this. She'd knowingly engaged in an affair with a married CEO, accepted gifts and trips funded by corporate theft, participated in the deception. I felt a twinge of something for her. Not quite sympathy, but recognition of how young she was, how naive. She'd probably thought Richard was going to leave me for her, that this was a great romance, not a sordid affair that would destroy her career before it really started. But that twinge of feeling disappeared quickly. Stephanie was 28, not 18. She had an MBA from Stanford. She was smart enough to know that sleeping with your married boss and accepting expensive gifts charged to company accounts was wrong on multiple levels. She'd made her choices. Now she'd face the consequences. I called Helen at 8 a.m. Portland time, 10 a.m. in our city. Victoria, she answered immediately. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said. I got your email. I can join the board meeting by video conference this afternoon. Good, I need to prepare you for what's coming. This is going to get messy. Richard has retained counsel, Marcus Brennan from Sheffield and Ross. I knew that name. Marcus Brennan was one of the top employment attorneys in the state, expensive and aggressive. Of course, Richard had hired him. Let him, I said. The evidence speaks for itself. It does, Helen agreed. But Victoria, you need to understand that this is going to become public. We're a high-profile company. You and Richard are known figures in the tech world. When word gets out that we're investigating the CEO for fraud and ethics violations, the media is going to be all over it. I know, I said quietly. I've been thinking about that. There's something else, Helen continued. Richard is claiming that the flight diversion yesterday was unlawful, that you essentially kidnapped him and Ms. Corwin by changing the routing without their knowledge. I actually laughed at that. Kidnapped? I'm a co-owner of that aircraft. I have every legal right to determine its routing. They landed safely at a fully operational airfield. No one was harmed or endangered. His lawyer is grasping at straws. That's what I told him, Helen said with satisfaction. But he's trying to paint you as vindictive and unstable, trying to make this about a scorned wife acting irrationally rather than about his own misconduct. Of course he is, I said bitterly. That's classic Richard. Deflect, blame others, never take responsibility. The board isn't buying it, Helen assured me, especially not after reviewing the evidence. Margaret Chen called it the most thorough documentation of executive misconduct she'd ever seen. You did good work, Victoria. After we hung up, I sat in Cassie's guest room and thought about what was coming. A board investigation, legal proceedings, probably a divorce, media attention, my private pain becoming public spectacle. Everything in me wanted to hide, to stay here in Portland in my sister's cozy guest room and pretend none of this was happening. But I hadn't built a billion-dollar company by hiding from difficult situations. I'd faced down hostile investors and brutal competitors and impossible technical challenges. I could face this too. At 2 p.m., I logged into the video conference for the emergency board meeting. All 7 board members were present, their faces arranged in a grid on my laptop screen. Margaret Chen, our lead independent director, ran the meeting with her characteristic efficiency. "Thank you all for convening on short notice," she began. "As you know from the materials circulated by Helen Zhao, we're here to address serious allegations of executive misconduct. Victoria, we appreciate you joining us remotely. Can you walk us through what you discovered and when?" I did. Calmly and professionally, I laid out the timeline, Maya bringing me the flight manifest, my investigation into expense reports and flight records, the apartment rental, the hotel charges, the systematic theft of company resources, the security logs showing late-night office access, the full scope of Richard's 8-month affair and the corporate funds used to support it. The board members listened in grim silence. A few asked clarifying questions. Margaret took detailed notes. "And the flight diversion yesterday?" David Rodriguez asked. "Can you explain your thinking there?" "I needed to stop the misuse of corporate assets," I said simply. Richard had filed a fraudulent flight plan claiming a business trip to Singapore while actually planning a personal vacation to the Maldives. As co-owner of the aircraft, I exercised my right to redirect it. No one was harmed. The plane landed safely at a facility we own. It was the fastest way to prevent further theft of company resources. "Some might call it vindictive," David said carefully. "Some might call it protecting corporate assets," I replied coolly. "The jet costs approximately $15,000 per flight hour. The trip to the Maldives would have cost the company over $200,000. I prevented that theft. If that's vindictive, then I suppose I'm vindictive. But I prefer to think of it as responsible financial stewardship." Margaret actually smiled at that. "Well said. Victoria, I want to be clear about something. Speaking personally, I think you've shown remarkable composure and professionalism in an incredibly difficult situation. You discovered that your husband was having an affair, and your first instinct was to protect the company. That speaks volumes about your character." "Thank you," I said quietly. The meeting continued for another hour. The board voted unanimously to continue Richard's administrative leave pending the completion of the formal investigation. They voted to place Stephanie on unpaid leave given her junior position and clear policy violations. They voted to authorize Helen to engage forensic accountants to do a complete audit of all executive expenses for the past 2 years. And they voted, with me abstaining, to appoint me as interim sole CEO while Richard was on leave. "The company needs leadership," Margaret explained. "You're the natural choice, Victoria. You've been running operations for years anyway. This just makes it official." After the meeting ended, I sat staring at my laptop screen. Interim CEO. I'd never wanted that title, had always been content to be the CTO, the technical brain behind Richard's charismatic leadership. But now it was mine by default, and I was going to use it. Over the next few days, I participated in a flurry of meetings and calls from Cassie's guest room. The forensic accounting firm started their audit. Helen's external investigators began interviewing employees. Patricia from HR documented everything for what was looking more and more like a termination for cause. And the media got wind of it. The first article appeared in TechCrunch 3 days after the board meeting. Ashford Global Solutions CEO on leave amid ethics investigation. It was brief, citing unnamed sources, but it was enough to set off a feeding frenzy. Within hours, every tech publication was running stories. Forbes, Wired, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. Each article had slightly more detail than the last, pieced together from anonymous sources and public records. Ashford CEO accused of misusing corporate funds. Power couple's empire in turmoil as fraud allegations surface. Inside the Ashford Global Solutions executive scandal. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanting comments. Industry colleagues asking what was happening. Investors concerned about the company's stability. I issued one brief statement through our PR team. Ashford Global Solutions takes any allegations of misconduct extremely seriously. We are conducting a thorough investigation and will take appropriate action based on the findings. The company's operations continue normally under existing leadership. We remain committed to serving our clients and stakeholders with integrity. Professional, neutral, revealing nothing. But privately, the investigation was revealing everything. The forensic accountants found even more than I had. Richard hadn't just been stealing for the affair with Stephanie. There were irregularities going back 3 years, unexplained bonuses he'd authorized for himself, corporate funds funneled through shell companies, expense reports that were completely fabricated. The total came to over $800,000, not enough to seriously damage a billion-dollar company, but enough to constitute serious fraud, criminal fraud. Victoria, we need to discuss next steps, Helen said in a call 2 weeks after the investigation began. The evidence is overwhelming. We have grounds for immediate termination, and we should seriously consider referring this to law enforcement. What does Richard's attorney say? I asked. Brennan is trying to negotiate a quiet exit. Richard resigns, agrees to repay the misappropriated funds, and we don't pursue criminal charges. In exchange, he wants a non-disparagement agreement and a neutral reference letter. I felt anger flash through me. He wants to steal almost $1 million and just walk away with a handshake and good references. That's what they're proposing, Helen said. But Victoria, the decision isn't just yours. The board has to vote on it. And I have to tell you, some members are leaning toward accepting. A public trial would be expensive and damaging to the company's reputation. A quiet resignation lets us move on. Let Richard move on, you mean? I said bitterly. Let him escape consequences, learn nothing, and probably do the same thing at his next company. I'm not saying I agree with it, Helen said carefully. I'm just telling you what's being discussed. Set up a call with the board, I said. I want to address this directly. That afternoon, I joined another video conference with all the board members. This time, I didn't just present facts. I made an argument. I understand the desire to avoid a prolonged public legal battle, I began. I understand wanting to protect the company's reputation. But I'm asking you to consider what message we send if we let Richard walk away with nothing more than a requirement to repay what he stole. I paused, looking at each face on the screen. We've built this company on principles: integrity, accountability, innovation through ethics. If we let a CEO systematically defraud the company for years and face no real consequences, what does that say about those principles? What does it say to our employees who follow the rules? What does it say to our clients who trust us? Margaret Chen nodded slowly. You're right, but Victoria, we also have to think practically. A criminal trial means months of negative media coverage. It means our CEO, regardless of guilt, becomes the face of corporate fraud. That damages the brand. Our CEO already is the face of corporate fraud, I said bluntly. The media already has the story. Letting Richard resign quietly doesn't make this go away. It just makes us look like we're covering it up. David Rodriguez spoke up. What are you proposing instead? Termination for cause, with full documentation of why. Criminal referral to the DA's office. Let the legal system decide if charges are appropriate. And complete transparency with our stakeholders about what happened and how we're addressing it. That's a scorched earth approach, David said. That's an integrity approach, I countered. And it's the only way to send a clear message that this behavior is unacceptable. The board debated for another hour. Finally, they voted, 4-2 with one abstention, to terminate Richard for cause and refer the matter to law enforcement. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. That evening, I called Helen back. When will Richard be notified? Tomorrow morning. We're having his attorney come in for a meeting. We'll present the termination letter and the evidence we're turning over to the DA. And Stephanie. She's being terminated as well. Different grounds, ethics violations, inappropriate relationship with a supervisor, accepting gifts of significant value. But the outcome is the same. Does she know what she's lost? I asked quietly. Her career in tech is essentially over, Helen said. At 28, with a termination for ethics violations on her record from a prominent company, she'll never get another position at this level. She threw away everything for an affair with a married man who was never going to leave his wife. Except he'd lost his wife anyway. Lost everything, in fact, except he'd been too stupid and arrogant to see it coming. I spent the next few weeks in Portland, working remotely, appearing by video for meetings and calls. Cassie's guest room became my temporary office. Her dining table became my conference room. And slowly, very slowly, I began to process everything that had happened. I was angry, yes. Furious at Richard's betrayal, at the years of lies, at the casual way he'd destroyed our marriage while I worked myself to exhaustion. But I was also grieving the marriage I'd thought I had, even though it had been an illusion. Grieving the future I'd imagined, the partnership I'd believed in, the trust that had been shattered. Cassie was there through all of it, letting me cry when I needed to cry, letting me rage when I needed to rage, and gently pushing me to take care of myself when I forgot to eat or sleep or leave the house. You're going to get through this, she told me one evening over dinner. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you are. You're one of the strongest people I know, Vic. I don't feel strong, I admitted. I feel stupid. How did I not see what was happening in my own marriage? Because you trusted your partner, Cassie said gently. That's not stupid. That's what you're supposed to do in a marriage. Richard is the one who failed, not you. 3 weeks after Richard's termination, the district attorney's office announced they were filing criminal charges. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of business records. If convicted, Richard could face up to 10 years in prison. The media exploded again. Now it wasn't just a corporate scandal, it was a criminal case. Photos of Richard being arraigned made the front page of the business section. Tech CEO charged with embezzling nearly $1 from own company. I watched the coverage from Cassie's couch, feeling strangely detached. That man in the expensive suit looking haggard and defeated, was that really the same person I'd married 17 years ago? The same person I'd built a company with, shared a life with? He looked like a stranger now. My phone rang. An unknown number, but I answered anyway. Victoria, Richard's voice rough and tired. Please, I need to talk to you. I should have hung up, should have maintained the clean separation I'd established. But some part of me, maybe the part that had loved him once upon a time, needed to hear what he had to say. You have 5 minutes, I said. I'm sorry, his voice cracked. God, Vic, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know how things got so out of control. You were thinking you could have everything, I said coldly. The successful company, the impressive wife, and the young mistress on the side. You were thinking I was too busy to notice and too devoted to leave even if I found out. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I interrupted. You spent $800,000 of corporate funds on your affair and other personal expenses. You rented an apartment to carry on your relationship. You used our jet, our resources, everything we built together to betray me and steal from the company. Don't you dare try to minimize what you did. Silence. Then, what do you want from me? What do I have to do to make this right? I almost laughed. Make it right. Richard, you can't make this right. You destroyed our marriage. You committed crimes. You're facing criminal charges. There is no making this right. I could fight these charges, he said, and there was an edge to his voice now, anger underneath the contrition. My lawyer says the evidence is circumstantial in places. We could drag this out for years, make it a very public, very ugly battle. Go ahead, I said calmly. Fight it. Make it as public and ugly as you want. The evidence is rock solid and you know it. All you'll do is make yourself look worse and rack up legal bills you can't afford. You've destroyed me, he said bitterly. Was that the goal, complete destruction? You destroyed yourself, I replied. I just made sure you faced consequences. There's a difference. I loved you, he said quietly. I know you don't believe that now, but I did. I do. You loved what I could do for you, I corrected. You loved having a brilliant wife who built the technology while you took credit. You loved the status and the money and the life we created. But you didn't love me enough to be faithful. You didn't respect me enough to be honest. And you didn't value me enough to not risk everything for an affair with a woman half your age. Stephanie was a mistake. Stephanie was a symptom, I said. The real problem was you, your arrogance, your entitlement, your belief that rules didn't apply to you. I took a breath, steadying myself. I'm filing for divorce. You'll be served papers next week. Given the criminal charges and the documented infidelity, I don't anticipate this being a long process. I'm keeping the house, my stock in the company, and my name. You can keep whatever's left after you pay restitution and legal fees. Vic. We're done, Richard. We've been done for a long time. I just didn't know it. I hung up and blocked his number. Again. That conversation should have brought closure. Instead, it just left me feeling empty. But over the following weeks, something shifted. The emptiness began to fill with something else. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility, freedom, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could build something new from the wreckage. The board officially appointed me as permanent CEO. Not interim, permanent. You've earned it, Margaret told me. The company is performing better under your leadership than it has in years. Clients love working directly with you. Employees respect you. This isn't a consolation prize, Victoria. This is recognition that you were always the real leader here. I restructured the executive team, promoting from within, bringing in new talent with impeccable ethics. I implemented new financial controls and oversight processes to ensure what Richard did could never happen again. I rebuilt the company culture around the principles I actually believed in, not just the ones we'd put on posters. And slowly, Ashford Global Solutions became just Global Solutions. We dropped Ashford from the name, rebranded completely, distanced ourselves from the scandal. The company I'd built was finally, truly mine. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Richard's arrest. We never saw each other in person again. All communication went through lawyers. Richard signed everything without fighting, probably because he was too focused on his criminal defense and couldn't afford another legal battle. I got the house, though I sold it almost immediately. Too many bad memories, too much empty space. I got my stock in the company, making me the majority shareholder. I got my name back, Victoria Chen. And I got my life back, piece by piece. Richard's criminal trial was scheduled for the following year. His attorney was negotiating a plea deal, reduced charges in exchange for a guilty plea and agreement to repay everything. He'd probably serve a year or two in minimum security, then spend the rest of his life trying to rebuild a career that was permanently tainted. Stephanie disappeared from the tech world entirely. I heard through industry contacts that she'd moved back east, was working in her family's business, had learned an expensive lesson about ambition and ethics, and married men who make promises they never intended to keep. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices. But I didn't feel the burning rage anymore either. Just a kind of distant pity for someone who'd thrown away her potential for something so worthless. 6 months after everything fell apart, I was back in my office. A new office, in our newly rebranded headquarters, when Maya knocked on my door. Victoria, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Her name is Jennifer Ashford. Richard's mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the scandal broke. She'd called a few times, sent emails I'd never responded to. I'd had nothing to say to her, no interest in her attempts to defend her son or plead for mercy. Send her in, I said after a moment. Maybe it was time for closure with that part of my life too. Jennifer Ashford walked into my office looking older than I remembered. She'd always been elegant, polished, proud of her successful son. Now she looked tired and sad. "Victoria," she said quietly, "thank you for seeing me." "Mrs. Ashford." I didn't invite her to sit, didn't offer her coffee or pleasantries, just waited. "I came to apologize," she said. "For Richard, for what he did to you, for the pain he caused." "You're not responsible for your son's choices," I said neutrally. "No, but I raised him," she said. "And I think I taught him the wrong lessons. I always told him he was special, that he deserved the best, that the rules were more flexible for people like us. I created that entitlement." I didn't argue with her. It was probably true. "I also wanted you to know," she continued, "that I never blamed you for what happened. Richard tried to paint you as vindictive, as overreacting. But I know what he did. I know he betrayed you and stole from the company. You had every right to respond the way you did." "Thank you," I said and meant it. "You built something remarkable," Jennifer said, looking around my office at the awards and patents and evidence of success. "Richard was always the face, but you were the brain and the heart. I think we all knew that, even if we didn't acknowledge it." After she left, I stood at my window looking out at the city. The same view I'd had before, but everything looked different now. Clearer, sharper, more real. I'd lost my marriage. I'd lost 15 years invested in a partnership that turned out to be based on lies. But I'd gained something too. I'd gained absolute clarity about my own strength. I'd learned that I could survive betrayal and come out stronger. I discovered that I didn't need Richard or anyone else to validate my worth. I'd built a billion-dollar company once with a partner. Now I was running it alone, and it was thriving. The revenge I'd enacted wasn't just about punishing Richard, though there was certainly an element of that. It was about taking back power he'd stolen. It was about refusing to be a victim. It was about standing up and saying that betrayal and theft and lies have consequences. And those consequences had been severe. Richard lost his career, his reputation, his freedom, his marriage, and his future in the industry he'd spent his entire adult life building. That was justice. But the real victory wasn't in Richard's downfall. It was in my own rebuilding. Every day that I walked into the office as CEO, every client I impressed with my vision and expertise, every employee who told me they were proud to work for a company with real integrity, every innovation we launched, every market we expanded into, every success we achieved. That was my revenge. Not destruction, but creation, building something even better from the ashes of what had burned down. One evening, almost a year after that Tuesday morning when Maya had walked into my office with news that shattered my world, I was having dinner with Cassie at her house. Her husband Tom was there, and their 2 kids, and the house was full of noise and laughter and warmth. "You seem different," Cassie observed as we did dishes while Tom wrangled the kids for bedtime. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "I'm not carrying that weight anymore. The anger, the betrayal, the grief, it's still there, but it doesn't define me." "What does define you now?" she asked. I thought about it. My work, my integrity, my ability to overcome, and maybe, eventually, my ability to trust again. "Think you'll try relationships again?" Cassie asked carefully. "Dating." "Someday," I said. "Not now. Right now, I'm focused on building the company, on proving that Global Solutions is stronger than it ever was, on showing the world that I was always the one holding everything together." "You're remarkable, you know that," Cassie said, hugging me. "You took the worst thing that could happen and turned it into a catalyst for positive change. Not everyone could do that." "I had good teachers," I said, hugging her back, "and a good support system." That night, driving back to my new apartment, smaller than the house I'd shared with Richard but entirely mine, I thought about the lessons I'd learned. I'd learned that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. That betrayal leaves scars even when you survive it. That love isn't enough if it's not paired with respect and honesty and commitment. I'd learned that revenge, served strategically, isn't about destruction for its own sake. It's about consequences, about ensuring that actions have appropriate results, about refusing to let someone's bad behavior go unaddressed. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever known. That I could survive my worst nightmare and come out the other side not just intact, but thriving. And I'd learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the thing that sets you free. Richard's betrayal had destroyed our marriage, yes, but it had also released me from a partnership that was holding me back, from a life that looked successful but felt empty, from a version of myself that was always accommodating, always compromising, always putting someone else first. Now I put myself first, my vision, my values, my future. And that future looked bright. As I pulled into my parking garage, my phone buzzed with an email from Margaret Chen. Board meeting went well. The Q4 numbers are phenomenal. Revenue up 34% year over year. Client satisfaction at an all-time high. Employee retention up 22%. Victoria, you're not just maintaining what Richard built. You're taking us to places we never could have gone with him. Well done. I smiled reading those words, not gloating, not triumphant, just satisfied, deeply, thoroughly satisfied. Richard was wrong about so many things, wrong about my priorities, wrong about my awareness, wrong about my strength. But his biggest mistake was thinking that he was the valuable one in our partnership, that he was the one who made Ashford Global Solutions successful, that without him as the charismatic face, the company would struggle. He'd been wrong about that most of all. Because it turned out that what clients and employees and investors really valued wasn't charm and charisma. It was competence, integrity, vision, real leadership, not performance. All the things I'd been providing all along, while Richard took credit. Now I got the credit, and the company, and the future. And Richard got exactly what he deserved, nothing. That was my revenge. Not the flight diversion, though that had been satisfying. Not the criminal charges, though those were just. Not even the public humiliation and destroyed reputation. My real revenge was succeeding without him, proving that I was always the essential one, showing the world that the company ran better, performed better, innovated better under my leadership alone. Richard had bet everything that I needed him, that he was irreplaceable, that I'd be lost without him. He'd lost that bet, and I'd won everything. As I settled into my apartment that night, into the home I'd chosen and decorated myself, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not happiness, not yet. There were still hard days, still moments of grief and anger and doubt. Still nights when I wondered if I could have done things differently, if there were signs I'd missed, if some part of this was my fault. But those moments were getting fewer and farther between, and they were being replaced by something stronger, confidence in myself, in my decisions, in the life I was building. I'd survived betrayal. I'd enacted justice. I'd rebuilt my life on my own terms. And if I could do that, I could do anything. That was the real lesson of this entire nightmare. Not that revenge was sweet, though it had its moments. Not that justice always prevails, though sometimes it does. The real lesson was that you are stronger than you think, that you can survive things you never thought you could. That sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for becoming the best version of yourself. Richard thought he was taking a romantic vacation when he boarded that jet. He thought he'd gotten away with his affair and his theft. He thought he was clever enough to deceive me indefinitely. Instead, he boarded a plane to his own destruction. A flight that didn't end in tropical paradise, but in the middle of Montana, confused and stranded, watching his entire life collapse via email and phone calls. And while he was stranded in that remote airfield, I was driving toward Portland, toward my sister, toward freedom, leaving behind the wreckage of our marriage and the beautiful house that had become a prison. Driving toward a future that was entirely my own. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I served mine at 35,000 feet, and it was absolutely freezing. But the aftermath, the rebuilding, the recovery, the rediscovery of who I was outside of being Richard Ashford's wife. That was warm, that was light, that was life. And that was my real victory. Not bringing Richard down, though he deserved everything he got. But lifting myself up, higher than I'd ever been before, higher than I could have gone if I'd stayed in that marriage, in that partnership, in that life. Richard's betrayal set me free. And I was flying now, truly flying, in a way I never had when I was tethered to someone who saw me as an accessory to his success, rather than a brilliant, powerful woman in my own right. So yes, I changed the flight plan. I exposed the affair. I provided the evidence that destroyed his career and led to criminal charges. But I also changed my own flight plan, redirected my life towards something better, something real, something entirely mine. And that destination, that was paradise. The real kind, not a luxury resort where you pretend to be happy while everything is broken underneath. But actual peace, actual freedom, actual joy in work and life and self. That was worth more than any revenge. That was everything. 18 months after that September morning, when my world shattered and rebuilt itself, I stood on a stage in San Francisco accepting the Technology Innovator of the Year award. The ballroom was filled with 1,500 people, tech leaders, venture capitalists, journalists, competitors, colleagues. The lights were bright and hot, the applause was thunderous, and I was holding a glass trophy that reflected rainbow fragments of light across my face. Victoria Chen has not only navigated one of the most challenging periods any CEO could face, the presenter was saying, but she's transformed Global Solutions into the most innovative, ethically driven company in the industry. Under her sole leadership, the company has expanded into 12 new markets, launched groundbreaking encryption technology that's setting new industry standards, and maintained a 97% employee satisfaction rating. She's proven that integrity and success aren't just compatible, they're inseparable. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. Some I knew personally, others I'd only met through business dealings, and some were strangers who'd followed my story through the media coverage that had dominated tech news for months. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "This award is incredibly meaningful, but I want to be clear about something. The success of Global Solutions isn't mine alone. It belongs to every employee who chose to stay with us through scandal and uncertainty. It belongs to every client who continued to trust us when trust would have been easy to withdraw. It belongs to the board members who made difficult decisions based on principle rather than convenience." I paused, gathering my thoughts. This speech mattered, not for my ego, but for what it represented. 18 months ago, I discovered that someone I trusted had been systematically betraying that trust. Someone who was supposed to be my partner had been stealing from the company we built together, violating every ethical principle we claimed to stand for. I had a choice in that moment. I could have looked the away, accepted a quiet resolution, avoided the mess and publicity and pain that came with addressing it directly. The room was completely silent now. Everyone knew the story, but hearing me speak about it directly was different. I chose differently. I chose to demand accountability, even though it was hard, even though it hurt, even though it meant my private pain became public spectacle. Because I believe that integrity isn't something you practice only when it's convenient. Integrity is what you do when it costs you something. I saw several people nodding in the audience. Margaret Chen was in the third row, smiling with what looked like pride. Maya was at a table near the back, and when our eyes met, she gave me a subtle thumbs up. The past 18 months have taught me that crisis reveals character, but it doesn't create it. The strength I found to navigate this situation wasn't something that appeared suddenly. It was always there, built over years of solving impossible problems and refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible. What changed wasn't my capability. What changed was my willingness to use that capability for myself, not just for a company or a partnership or someone else's vision. I held up the trophy, watching light dance across its surface. So I accept this award not as a celebration of surviving scandal, but as recognition that we, all of us in this industry, have a responsibility to build companies that reflect our values, that treat people with respect, that operate with transparency, that understand success without integrity is just an expensive failure waiting to happen. The applause when I finished was even louder than before. As I walked off the stage, several people stopped me to shake my hand or offer congratulations. But the conversation I was most interested in happened in a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the crowds. "That was a hell of a speech," said a woman I'd never met in person but had been communicating with for months. Dr. Sarah Kimura, CEO of Quantum Dynamics, one of our biggest competitors and increasingly a potential collaborator. "You didn't pull any punches." "I'm done pulling punches," I said with a slight smile. "Life's too short to pretend things are other than what they are." "I appreciate that," Sarah said, "which is why I wanted to talk to you tonight about the partnership proposal we've been discussing. My board approved it this morning. If you're still interested, Quantum Dynamics would like to move forward with the joint venture." I felt excitement surge through me. This partnership would combine our encryption technology with their quantum computing capabilities, creating something that could revolutionize data security across multiple industries. It was exactly the kind of innovation I'd dreamed about but never been able to pursue when I was constantly managing Richard's messes and maintaining the facade of our partnership. "I'm very interested," I said. "Let's schedule a meeting next week with our respective teams and start hammering out the details." We shook hands, and as Sarah walked away, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not just for the award or the partnership, but for the fact that I was here at all. That I'd survived something that could have destroyed me and instead used it as fuel to build something better. The after-party was at a rooftop bar with views of the San Francisco skyline. I nursed a glass of wine and made conversation with various industry people, but part of my mind was elsewhere, remembering, processing, appreciating the distance I'd traveled. "You look contemplative," Margaret Chen said, appearing at my elbow with her own drink. "Everything okay?" "More than okay," I said honestly. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now, how different I am." "You're not that different," Margaret said thoughtfully. "You were always brilliant, always capable, always strong. You just weren't using all of that for yourself. You were dimming your own light to make someone else look brighter." "That's generous of you," I said. "It's accurate," she corrected. "Victoria, I've known you for 10 years. I sat on your board and watched Richard take credit for your innovations, watched you defer to him in meetings when your ideas were clearly superior, watched you support his vision when you should have been pursuing your own. I wanted to say something so many times, but it wasn't my place to interfere in your marriage or partnership." "Would I have listened if you had?" I asked. "Probably not," she admitted with a small smile. "We rarely listen when people try to warn us about things we're not ready to see, but you saw it eventually, and more importantly, you acted on it. That takes courage that most people don't have." After Margaret moved on to talk with other colleagues, I found a quiet corner of the rooftop and looked out at the city lights spreading in all directions. My phone buzzed with a text from Cassie. "Saw the live stream of your speech. I'm crying. So proud of you I can't even find words. You're amazing, sis." I smiled, typing back. "Couldn't have done it without you. Love you." Another text came in, this one from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the award. You deserved it. J." I stared at that message for a long moment. J. Jennifer Ashford, Richard's mother. We'd spoken a few times since her visit to my office, brief conversations that were cordial but not warm. She'd reached out when Richard was sentenced, 2 years in minimum security federal prison, followed by 3 years probation and full restitution of the embezzled funds. I'd responded with a simple acknowledgement, nothing more. But this text felt different, like a closing of a circle, a final acknowledgement from that chapter of my life that it was truly over. I typed back, "Thank you, I hope you're well." I didn't expect a response and I didn't get one, but somehow that felt right. Some relationships end cleanly and others just fade into polite distance. This was the latter, and I was at peace with it. "Victoria Chen, as I live and breathe." A familiar voice startled me out of my thoughts. I turned to find Marcus Webb, an old friend from my MIT days who'd gone on to found his own successful startup. "Marcus, I didn't know you were in town," I said, genuinely pleased to see him. We'd kept in touch over the years but rarely saw each other in person. "Flew in specifically for this conference," he said, "and to see you accept that award. Vic, I have to tell you, watching what you did, not just surviving that nightmare but using it as a launching pad, has been inspiring as hell. Thanks, I said, though I wouldn't recommend the experience to anyone. No, I imagine not, he said with sympathy. But you handled it with such grace and strength, and the company is absolutely thriving under your leadership. The encryption protocol you launched last quarter is being talked about as potentially Nobel Prize-worthy work. It's a team effort, I said automatically, then paused. Actually, no, I'm going to stop doing that, giving away credit when it's actually mine. The core algorithm is my design. My team helped implement and refine it, but the fundamental innovation was mine. Marcus grinned. There she is, the Victoria I remember from grad school who used to demolish everyone in theoretical computing seminars. I always wondered where that person went. She got married and convinced herself that being supportive meant being small, I said. But she's back now. We talked for another hour, catching up on years of life and work. Marcus mentioned, almost casually, that he was recently divorced himself. Nothing scandalous like your situation, he said quickly. Just grew apart, wanted different things. It was amicable but still hard. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. Don't be. I'm actually happier now than I've been in years. Funny how sometimes the end of something is actually a beginning. He paused, then added with studied casualness, I don't suppose you'd be interested in having dinner sometime. Catch up properly without the noise of a conference. I looked at him, really looked at him. Marcus was attractive, tall, still had most of his hair, kind eyes behind stylish glasses. Successful in his own right, so there'd be no power imbalance or weird dynamics. Someone who'd known me before Richard, who remembered who I was when I was just Victoria Chen, brilliant programmer with the world ahead of her. 6 months ago, I would have automatically declined. Would have said I wasn't ready, wasn't interested, wasn't open to anything resembling romance or dating or complications. But standing here now, having just accepted an award for rebuilding my life and company, having just secured a partnership that would take my innovations to new heights, having just realized how far I'd come from that shattered woman crying on her sister's porch. Yes, I said, I'd like that. Marcus's face lit up. Yeah, great. I'll call you next week when we're both back home and we'll find a time. As he walked away to rejoin his colleagues, I felt something unfamiliar flutter in my chest. Not love, certainly not, but possibility. The sense that maybe, eventually, I could trust someone again. That my capacity for connection hadn't been permanently destroyed by Richard's betrayal. Not now, not rushed, but someday. The conference ended late, and I didn't get back to my hotel until well past midnight. I kicked off the uncomfortable heels I'd worn for the award ceremony and sat by the window in my hotel room, looking out at San Francisco's nightscape. My phone buzzed with emails and messages, congratulations from employees, clients, industry contacts. I scrolled through them with a sense of gratitude and accomplishment. Then I saw one that made me pause. An email from an address I didn't recognize, with the subject line, I owe you an apology. I open it cautiously. Mrs. Ash, Ms. Chen. You don't know me, but my name is Stephanie Corwin. I don't expect you to read this, and you certainly don't owe me any response if you do. But I've been watching your success from a distance, and seeing you accept that award tonight made me realize I needed to finally write this email I've been drafting in my head for months. I want to apologize for my role in what happened. Not because I'm looking for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. But because you deserve to hear someone take actual responsibility instead of making excuses. I was 28 and stupid, and so dazzled by attention from a powerful man that I convinced myself what we were doing was somehow okay. I told myself that your marriage must already be broken if Richard was willing to stray. I told myself I was special, different, that he really loved me and would eventually leave you for me. I told myself a lot of lies because they were easier than facing the truth. I was sleeping with my married boss and accepting expensive gifts paid for with stolen money, and none of that was remotely okay. You lost your husband and had your marriage destroyed. I lost a career I spent years preparing for and learned an expensive lesson about ethics and consequences. But the difference is, you've risen from the ashes and built something even more impressive. You've turned catastrophe into triumph. I'm working in my family's restaurant business now in Boston. It's honest work, and I'm learning to be okay with a quieter life than I'd planned. I'm also in therapy, trying to understand why I made such destructive choices and how to be a better person going forward. I don't know if knowing any of this matters to you. Maybe you've moved on completely and never think about me or Richard or what happened. If so, I'm glad. You deserve peace. But if some part of you ever wondered whether the other woman understood the magnitude of what she participated in, I want you to know, I do. I understand what I did. I'm ashamed of it. And I'm trying to become someone who would never make those choices again. You deserved better than both of us. I'm sorry. Stephanie. I read the email 3 times, feeling complicated emotions swirl through me. Anger, yes. The wound was healed, but the scar was still there. But also something like pity, and maybe even a strange gratitude that Stephanie was at least taking responsibility rather than playing the victim. I sat with the email for a long time, debating whether to respond. Finally, I typed out a brief reply. Stephanie, I appreciate you sending this. Apology noted. I hope you build a good life for yourself and learn from your mistakes. I have learned from mine. The mistake of trusting someone who didn't deserve it, and the mistake of making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego. I hope we both become wiser. Victoria Chen. I hit send before I could second-guess it. Then I blocked her email address. Not out of anger, but out of finality. That chapter was closed. I didn't need any further communication or updates or connection to that part of my past. The next morning, I flew back home and went directly to the Global Solutions headquarters. It was Saturday, so the building was mostly empty, but I wanted to spend some time in my office alone. Just to think, to appreciate, to acknowledge how far I'd come. I walked through the quiet hallways, past conference rooms where brilliant people solved complex problems, past labs where the next generation of technology was being developed, past walls covered with patents and awards and proof of innovation. All of it still standing, all of it thriving, despite the scandal, despite the turmoil, despite everything. Because it had never really been Richard's company anyway. He'd just convinced everyone, including me, that it was. In my office, I sat at my desk and pulled up the company's current metrics. Revenue was up 41% from this time last year. Client acquisition was at an all-time high. Employee retention had jumped 28% after I implemented new policies around work-life balance, ethics, and professional development. We'd filed for 12 new patents in the last quarter alone. By every measurable standard, Global Solutions was more successful now than it had ever been under Richard's leadership. That felt like vindication, not in a petty way, but in a profound way. Proof that I hadn't been crazy to think I was contributing equally to our success. Proof that my innovations, my leadership, my vision had always been the real engine driving everything forward. Richard had been the hood ornament, shiny and decorative, but not actually making the car run. My computer chimed with a video call request. Cassie. Hey, she said when I answered, her face filling the screen. I know you just got back, but I wanted to see your face and tell you again how incredible your speech was. Tom and I watched it together and we both cried. It's been a journey, I said with a smile. How are you feeling? Really feeling, not the public version. I thought about it. Proud, tired, hopeful. A little scared of what comes next, but in a good way. Like I'm standing at the edge of something new and I'm ready to jump. You've earned whatever comes next, Cassie said firmly. You've done the hard work of rebuilding. Now you get to enjoy what you've built. Someone asked me to dinner, I said suddenly. Marcus Webb, a friend from MIT. He made it clear it was a date kind of dinner, not a business kind. Cassie's eyes went wide. And what did you say? I said yes. Victoria Chen, Cassie actually squealed. That's amazing, tell me everything about him. There's not much to tell yet. We're just going to dinner. It might be nothing. It might be terrible. I might not be ready for dating at all. Or it might be wonderful, Cassie countered. You won't know unless you try. And Vic, you deserve wonderful. You deserve someone who sees how incredible you are and treats you accordingly. After we hung up, I sat in my office as the afternoon light shifted across the city outside my windows. I thought about Richard, currently serving his sentence in a minimum security federal facility. I didn't think about him often anymore, but when I did, I felt mostly nothing. No anger, no longing, no unfinished business. Just a vague regret that so many years had been built on false foundations. I wondered if he thought about me, if he regretted his choices, if he'd learned anything from the spectacular way his life had imploded. Probably not. People like Richard rarely did. They were too busy blaming circumstances, making excuses, painting themselves as victims rather than architects of their own destruction. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Richard's growth or lack thereof was no longer my concern. I'd moved on, moved up, moved forward into a life that was entirely mine. My phone rang. An unknown number, but I'd stopped being paranoid about those. Is this Victoria Chen? A young woman's voice, uncertain. Yes, who's calling? My name is Amanda Torres. I'm a graduate student at Stanford, finishing my MBA. I'm also president of the Women in Technology Club here. Ms. Chen, I know this is incredibly presumptuous, but I had to try. Would you consider being our keynote speaker at our annual leadership conference next month? I'm flattered, I said, but I'm sure you could get speakers with more impressive credentials. More impressive than someone who built a billion-dollar company, navigated one of the biggest corporate scandals in recent history with integrity intact, and came out stronger than before. Amanda interrupted. Ms. Chen, you're who we want. You're who we need to hear from. Not someone who had a smooth path to success, but someone who faced real adversity and found the strength to overcome it. I felt emotion tighten my throat. When is the conference? October 15th. It's here on campus. We can't offer much in terms of honorarium, but we'd love to have you if you're available. I'll check my schedule, I said. But Amanda, I want to do this. Young women need to hear that setbacks aren't endings, that betrayal doesn't define you, that you can lose everything you thought mattered and discover you're strong enough to build something even better. That's exactly what we need to hear, Amanda said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Ms. Chen. This means everything. After confirming details and ending the call, I sat back in my chair and smiled. Speaking to business students, sharing my story, helping the next generation avoid the mistakes I'd made and embrace the lessons I'd learned, that felt meaningful in a way that awards and revenue growth didn't. That felt like purpose. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. I ran the company with a confidence I'd never felt before, made decisions without second-guessing myself or seeking validation, pursued innovations I believed in rather than compromises that served someone else's vision. And I started saying yes to things I'd always said no to. Dinner with Marcus, which turned into a second dinner, then a third. Coffee with former colleagues who wanted to reconnect. Lunch with Maya, who'd become more friend than assistant. A weekend trip to wine country with Cassie and Tom. I was building a life, not just a career. Creating balance instead of burning myself out. Making space for joy instead of just achievement. The speaking engagement at Stanford was both terrifying and exhilarating. 200 MBA students packed into an auditorium, all looking at me with expectation and curiosity. I told them my story, the whole story, holding nothing back. The betrayal, the investigation, the revenge, the rebuilding. The thing about betrayal, I told them, is that it reveals truth. It strips away the comfortable lies you've been telling yourself and forces you to see reality clearly. And yes, that's painful. It's devastating, but it's also liberating. I paused, looking out at all those young faces. I thought I needed my husband to be successful. I thought our partnership was essential to everything I'd achieved. His betrayal forced me to discover the truth. I was always the essential one. His contribution was real but not irreplaceable. Mine was. A young woman raised her hand. How did you find the courage to expose him? Weren't you afraid of losing everything? I was terrified, I admitted. But I realized I'd already lost everything that mattered: trust, respect, genuine partnership. The money and company and house were just things. The relationship was already dead. Exposing what he'd done wasn't destroying something valuable. It was clearing away something toxic so I could build something healthy. Another student asked, "Do you regret the way you handled it? The flight diversion, the criminal charges? Some people might say you went too far." I considered that carefully. I don't regret demanding accountability. I don't regret using legal and ethical means to ensure consequences for illegal and unethical behavior. Did I enjoy watching Richard's life fall apart? Not as much as I thought I would. Revenge is satisfying in theory, but complicated in reality. What I don't regret at all is refusing to be a victim. Refusing to quietly accept betrayal and theft because making waves would be uncomfortable. The students gave me a standing ovation when I finished. Afterward, dozens of them lined up to talk to me, to shake my hand, to thank me for my honesty. "You made me realize I've been making myself smaller in my relationship," one young woman told me, tears in her eyes. "I'm always the one compromising, always accommodating his career over mine. You made me realize that's not partnership, that's submission." "Change it now," I told her. "Don't wait until something forces you to. Choose yourself before circumstances make the choice for you." Driving back from Stanford, I felt a profound sense of peace. My story mattered. My experience, as painful as it had been, was helping others. That gave meaning to everything I'd survived. That night, I had dinner with Marcus at a small Italian restaurant neither of us had been to before. We talked about work and books and travel and 1,000 other things. He made me laugh. I made him think. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, without the performance or pressure that characterized so many dates. "I have to admit something," Marcus said over dessert. "I've had a crush on you since grad school, but you were always so focused, so driven, so out of my league that I never worked up the courage to ask you out." "I wasn't out of your league," I said with a smile. "I was just oblivious, too buried in code to notice much of anything outside my research." "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're even more impressive now than you were then," he said. "Not because of the company or the success, but because you've clearly found yourself. You seem comfortable in your own skin in a way you didn't back then." "I am," I realized. "For the first time in my adult life, I think I actually am." We walked to our cars together, and when we said goodbye, Marcus kissed me. Gently, questioningly, giving me space to pull away if I wanted. I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, and it felt like possibility. Like maybe, eventually, I could trust someone with my heart again. Not now, not rushed, but someday. When I got home to my apartment, a beautiful space I'd designed myself, filled with things I loved rather than things that looked impressive, I stood at the window looking out at the city lights. I thought about where I'd been 18 months ago. Broken, angry, grieving, uncertain. Standing in the wreckage of my marriage and wondering if I'd survive. And I thought about where I was now, CEO of a thriving company, award-winning innovator, woman who'd survived betrayal and emerged stronger, someone who demanded accountability and refused to be diminished. The journey from there to here had been brutal, but it had also been necessary. Richard's betrayal had destroyed my marriage, yes, but it had also freed me from a partnership that was holding me back, from a version of myself that was too small, too accommodating, too willing to dim my light for someone else's comfort. In a twisted way, Richard had given me the greatest gift. He'd forced me to become fully myself. I didn't thank him for it. His intentions had been selfish and destructive, not benevolent. But I could acknowledge that the outcome, eventually, was positive. That I'd taken his worst and turned it into my best. That was the real moral of this story, I realized. Not that revenge is sweet or that betrayal can be overcome. Those things were true, but they weren't the deepest truth. The deepest truth was this: you are not what happens to you. You are how you respond to what happens to you. Richard betrayed me. That was what happened. But I chose to demand accountability, to rebuild with integrity, to use pain as fuel rather than poison. That was my response. And my response defined my future far more than his actions defined my past. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Cassie. I think I'm finally okay. Actually, genuinely okay, maybe even happy. Her response came immediately. You deserve to be. Proud of you doesn't even begin to cover it. Love you, sis. I smiled, setting down my phone and looking around my apartment. At the bookshelves filled with volumes I'd actually read, not designer books chosen for their spine colors. At the art I'd selected because it moved me, not because it was expensive or impressive. At the comfortable furniture chosen for how it felt, not how it looked. This was my space, my life, my future. Built on my terms, by my hands, according to my values. Richard was in prison, his reputation destroyed, his career over. Stephanie was in Boston serving pasta and trying to rebuild a life after throwing away her potential. The company we'd built together was now mine alone, and it was thriving beyond anything we'd achieved together. Justice had been served, consequences had been delivered, the guilty had been punished. But more importantly, the innocent, me, had been freed. Freed from lies, from betrayal, from living a half-life in service to someone else's ego. Freed to be fully, completely, unapologetically myself. And that freedom was worth more than any revenge. That freedom was everything. I went to bed that night with genuine peace for the first time in longer than I could remember. And I dreamed not of the past, not of Richard or planes or betrayal. I dreamed of the future, of possibilities and partnerships and innovations yet to come, of a life built on truth instead of lies, on strength instead of accommodation, on self-respect instead of self-sacrifice. I dreamed of flying, truly flying, toward horizons I couldn't even see yet but knew were bright and beautiful and mine. The cold dish of revenge had been satisfying, but the warm embrace of my own power, my own worth, my own future. That was transcendent. And I was just getting started. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, remember this. Betrayal reveals truth, but it doesn't define your future. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them, and then show yourself who you really are. Strength isn't never falling down. Strength is standing back up and building something even better from the pieces. Don't make yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable. Don't dim your light so someone else can shine. Don't accept betrayal because demanding accountability is uncomfortable. You are more powerful than you know. You are more valuable than they made you feel. You are more capable than anyone, including yourself, might believe. And when life forces you to choose between being small and safe or being true and strong, choose strong every single time. Because the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful, so happy, so completely yourself that their betrayal becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. Not because of what they did, but because of who you became in response. Now smash that subscribe button, drop a comment about your own journey from betrayal to triumph, and remember, you're stronger than you think, and your story isn't over yet.